Game 5 of the World Chess Championship match, Magnus Carlsen against Karjakin. The question is, after 4 draws so far, will Magnus Carlsen finally break through Karjakin's defenses after he got so close already in the last 2 games, games 3 and 4? Or will maybe Karjakin draw the first blood so far in this match? We shall find out in a moment. Just before we begin, if you would like to watch just the highlights, so a quicker video, because this is the full analysis where I go over the complete game, then just click on the link in the first line of the description. It will lead you to the highlight video in which I just cover the main points of the game. Alright, with that being said, let's get started. Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces and beginning with e4. Now the 4th time in a row we see this move, which actually has been a rare guess at World Championship matches in the recent past. And Karjakin responds with e5, just as he did in the 3rd game. But we're seeing a new opening. Carlsen goes for the Italian game, bishop c4, not the Spanish that we have seen in the 3rd game and that Karjakin also employed. So bishop c5, castle, knight f6, d3, castle, and recently this move 6a4 has seen a lot of popularity on the top level because the best players are trying to find new ideas to put some life into a position, and there are a lot of subtleties here, but in general the point is to win some space on the queen side, which can't be a bad idea. So black just develops naturally, d6, c3. Now there's the threat of winning the bishop by going b4 followed by a5. So black plays a6 to give this bishop some space. And Carlsen goes b4 anyway, which I would say is not the main move at this point, pretty sure. b4 of course wins more space for white on the queen side, but on the other hand you're also slightly weakening this pawn structure. You can see, for example, this pawn is a little bit weaker now, and in the future as well these pawns could be weak. So it's kind of a double-edged sword that would go too far, but it has benefits and drawbacks. Alright, the bishop drops back. Now rook e1, knight e7, which is a very common maneuver to bring the knight over here and also prepare c6 d5, which is the general plan for black in this position. Knight bd2, knight g6, and now white goes d4 in fact. But with the knight perfectly placed here defending a pawn on e5, black can just react with c6 and keep it as it is in the center right now, preparing this d5 break. h3, standard useful move to take the g4 square away from the black pieces. And now c takes d4, c takes d4, and here Karjakin goes for knight takes e4, which is not a blunder. It's just temporarily giving a piece, but getting it back in just a moment. Here white actually had an interesting choice. Carlsen went for bishop takes f7. Knight takes e4 was also possible, of course, and I think would have been better and would have suited Carlsen more. Well, maybe that's too far of a stretch, but here we'll get a position where white can just play for win. b5 has a tiny edge, not in any way decisive, but a tiny edge, and can try something. For example, a line that was discussed here. It first looks like it's really nothing for white in this position, but after a few more exchanges here, it looks like black is completely equalized, but rook a6 is quite a strong move because the bishop cannot move right now, as the white rook is taking away this square, and obviously the bishop cannot go back because then the rook is hanging, and white can target the c6 pawn and has some pressure here, and of course not any risks of losing. So that was an interesting alternative to what Carlsen did, and I would even go that far that might have been objectively better than what Carlsen did. But the rising position is also quite interesting. So Carlsen gives the piece or gives the piece back, and now takes on e4. And once again we have the situation where, well, Carlsen was not too unhappy to part with the bishop pair. And what is interesting actually about this position is that it is mirroring, in a way, the last game, game 4, where we saw Carlsen's knight on c4 and the light square bishop on a2. So this was kind of interesting, and we'll get to that later on as well. Just to point out real quick here, knight eg5 looks like first a good active move, where black just plays rook e7 and will kick this knight out with h6 next move, and there's nothing going on here on the king side for white. So knight c5 played, now h6, good move by Karjakin, taking the square away from the white pieces. Rook a3, nice maneuver to double the rooks on the e-file, and really white has to play quickly here, because once black gets all his pieces into play, he's completely fine. He has the better pawn structure, with these pawns all being intact and protecting each other well. White has several pawn islands, obviously, and black has the bishop pair, so these are the trumps on black's side, but on the other hand, white is better developed and will try to put on some pressure right away. So black continues his development, bishop f5, and now Carlsen goes for knight e5, which changes the position. Rook a3 was the natural alternative, but it seems like white really doesn't have much here. Just queen c7, prepare rook a f8, and now, for example, rook e8 check, rook takes, and rook f8, and we see a lot of pieces coming off, and I don't see much for white going on here that would be around equal. So knight e5 is ambitious, but it's also a little bit risky. So we'll get to that. Knight takes e5 is forced. Now d takes e5. If rook takes e5, then the bishop is coming back into play, and black is completely fine. So d takes e5 was Carlsen's idea, to have a passed pawn on the e-file, which is ready to advance, and e6 is indeed a move black has to consider now. And here Karjakin took some time and then played a nice active move, bring the queen out, queen h4. Good move. Getting the queen out, targeting b4, having an eye on f2, preparing the rook coming over here. Strong move. And Carlsen played the only move to keep chances level. He played rook f3. If he's going for e6, then black can actually just take this one off, because after rook takes e6, this queen takes f2 check, and now after king h2, the bishop comes on this diagonal, switches diagonals, and suddenly white is just lost. King h1 runs into checkmate. And just to point out real quick, if white starts with king h1, well, here he's not checkmated, but he will still lose the bishop on c1. Black has regained the piece and is just 2 pawns up, completely winning. And for matter of mentioning everything, knight takes e6, runs into bishop takes f2, and the rook is hanging, and black wins as well. So that's why e6 isn't possible, and Carlsen played rook f3 to also safeguard this pawn on f2. And now Karjakin went for a safe choice, which was, practically speaking, I think a good choice, because he didn't have that much time anymore. And going for the more ambitious move here, bishop g6, well, it would have been double-edged to say the least, but here black also has decent winning chances. Whereas in the game, it's really only white who's playing. After bishop g6, well, the rooks come off, and here white should sacrifice a pawn with bishop e3, queen takes b4, knight d3, queen e7. We see white has sacrificed a pawn, but it seems that this pawn will give him enough counter chance, but quite a double-edged position with all 3 results possible. Now you might also wonder, hold on, this pawn is hanging here immediately as well, so why doesn't black take it? Well, here white can play bishop a3, and this is a really nice diagonal for the bishop, and then follow with e6, and just too much play here. All the white pieces are doing quite well, and black is in trouble. So what is the safe move I was talking about? Bishop takes c5, just taking off this knight, and once again we have this mirroring. Just like in the last game where Karjakin took the knight on c4, he takes it on c5, and once again he ends up with a weak pawn on b7. But let's be completely clear, this position is much better than the last position. Here black is maybe a little bit passive, but he's not worse. He can certainly defend. And this is what Karjakin was going for. He knew this position is defendable with the opposite colored bishops. But if there's one side playing, it's definitely white. White can try something, whereas black doesn't really have any ways to create play. So let's see what happened. Rook e8, both sides are now improving their position. Now the rook comes back here. Bishop e4, rook takes f7, queen takes f7, f3, bishop f5. Went through these moves pretty quickly because not much has happened. But now I think here Carlsen had an interesting choice. He played rather quickly king h2, but he could have gone for the more direct g4, pushing the bishop back and then going f4 with the threat f5. And if white gets f5 in without black having any sacrifices or any way to respond to that in a good way, then white's just winning, because f5 will happen, e6 will happen, and white grabs too much space, has these strong pawns, and that's it. So black has to play g6 here to stop f5. But now rook e2, sometimes you have ideas to play f5, go for this pawn h6. The position is still defendable for black, I'm pretty sure, but it seems to me that this was an improvement over the game where Carlsen was not able to get the setup with the pawns on g4 and f4, and it was just not possible anymore. So there was this chance, and maybe it feels to me he played a little bit too quickly here, played king h2. Once again though, it goes in line with his strategy in the match, not taking too big risks, but just coming from a point where he can play for a win, but it's playing for two results. Either he will win or he will draw. And g4, well, might take a little bit of risk because opening up the king, but let's be honest, not too much. So let's keep going. King h2, now bishop e6. Now obviously white cannot play g4 because the pawn is hanging on f3, and if white goes f4 to go g4 next move, black would just play h5, and you will pretty much never be able to go g4 in the game. So that's why white had to play it in two moves with tempo. So Carlsen is maneuvering, rook e2, queen g6. Both sides are improving their positions here. Rook f2. Carlsen is hinting at the possibility of going to g4 and f4, but queen b1, and here Carlsen didn't want to go g4, the queen being so active, so he kicked the queen out again and is shifting gears a little bit, now going a5, which was a surprise to the commentators because it is limiting white's choices or possibilities in the future, because there will never be the opportunity in some endgames maybe, or even with the queens on the board, for the king to march to b6, just like we saw in the last game where Carlsen's king ended up on b3. Well, the advantage of playing a5 is that white will put the queen on c3 and then have all the pawns protected. And that's probably why Carlsen did it, so that this pawn isn't hanging in some lines. So a move with pros and cons. And now Karjakin employed a very interesting strategy. He moved his king all the way up to the queen side because he decided his king is better placed there, and it allows him to maybe seek his own play with g5. And that's exactly what happened. Rook b4 now, having the idea of rook f4, is answered by g5. And now it makes a lot of sense to bring the king over here, so the king is safer than on g8. Very interesting play. What you had to spot though, which didn't happen in the game Carlsen played rook b2, queen b2 was possible, targeting this pawn. But black could just go king d8 when white doesn't take now because of take and queen takes e5, winning the bishop on e3. But interesting line is here going f4 first, and then after g4, now white can take, but it turns out that black is in time with his counterplay. Just g takes h3 and queen takes c6, queen e4, and this will result in a perpetual of some sort, either black or white giving a perpetual here. But this is an important line for the black plan to work. So Carlsen went rook b2 back, king d8, rook f2. Once again preparing this move g4, king c8, queen d4, and queen g6. And now he goes for g4, but at this point it seems like it's not the right point anymore. Carlsen's still trying to push for a win, but he should have just recognized that black has improved his position so much, bringing the king over to the queen side, that there's no point really in trying to open up the position, and he should just be happy with a draw. Just playing a move like queen d2, keeping an eye on this pawn so black cannot go for h5, g4. Because really it feels like to me at this point black has better chance of trying something than white. But Carlsen went for g4, which speaks for his fighting spirit, of course. But now h5, and if a king feels unhappy now or unsafe, it's the white king on h2. So far position is still completely fine. Queen d2, maybe Carlsen was relying on this move to target the pawn. But rook g7 protects it. King g3, and now rook g8. The players have made the time control, 40 moves are over, and interestingly, just now Carlsen commits a mistake just after the time control. And he plays the move king g2 after he gets in trouble. King g2 looks like an innocent move, but there are some drawbacks to it. Before I show you this move, let's look at some alternatives. There was the move bishop takes g5, actually, with the idea if queen takes g5, we'll get into his endgame where the white pawns are rolling. f4, rook g8, f5, and here black actually should play king d7, giving back the piece, and the rook endgame would be drawish. But there's also the move in this position, instead of taking on g5, black can also play h takes g4, and now white shouldn't take, because here he cannot advance his pawns anymore since the pawn g4 is hanging. So instead he should play h4, protect the bishop, and then we have this position which might be still fine, but let's be honest, you don't really want to play this with this open king on g3. Still better though than what happened in the game. Probably the safest option would be to go queen d4, also to block the possibility of this pawn just sacrificing itself for the bishop to come to d5. But, well, it might be fine. While these positions might be fine for white still, it's definitely more pleasant for black to play. But yeah, it seems like with queen d4, white should be able to hold everything together, and a draw would be the natural outcome. So Carlsen went king g2, and what's the problem here? Well, the problem is now that black can take over the h-file. And he could do this directly, which Karjakin didn't do. Queen h6. Or first, sacrifice a pawn. That's what he did. Really ambitious play. I like it. Giving this pawn up to give the bishop a beautiful, strong square on d5. Before we look into this, let's just quickly check this move out. Queen h6 and following up with rook h8, which is also quite dangerous for white. But it seems like black cannot get his bishop into play, and white will be okay, even though it looks sketchy as well, let's be honest. But yeah, it seems like white can defend, even though I would sweat some bullets here with white, definitely. So let's see the game. d4, and now queen takes d4 is played. Possibly bishop takes d4 is better, even though also here black is having a dangerous initiative, playing against the white king. And that's really, actually, let me insert this here real quick. That's one of the key points of opposite colored bishops with rooks and queens on the board. Is it's really important who has the initiative, because opposite colored bishops are so strong in attack because they don't have a counterpart and they can really get to the opponent's king. So that's what Karjakin recognized here, sacrificing the pawn. Here it looks like white can hold. Queen e2. You have to find some precise moves though. Bishop d5, you can see how black is increasing the pressure, but now the bishop also covering this square. Black doesn't have anything better to go into his endgame, and while black can still try, this should end in a draw. But queen takes d4 was played, and here Karjakin missed his chance to further put on more pressure. He played bishop d5, sensible move, but then he doesn't get this play on the h file anymore, so he should have gone for rook h8, preparing queen h6 and just going after the king. And one line could go queen e4, queen h6, king has to go, otherwise he will be checkmated. King runs towards the center, and probably here Karjakin didn't find any clear continuation. But there's one. The move bishop d5 is strong to get this queen away from the strong square on e4. And one point is that, well, white should not collect another pawn here on g5, because this check is quite important to get the king moving from e2, where he feels rather safe. And now queen a1, and it's just too much. The rook can come either d8 via d8 or h1. And what's important, the king feels pretty safe. The black king can hide on a7, and the white king is completely open and will be hunted down. So instead, in this position, white probably shouldn't even give the check, but just go back to d3. But queen a1, this whole position just seems really uncomfortable for white. I mean, yes, he is a pawn up, but that, as I said, doesn't really matter. Black will keep a long-term initiative attack against the white king. Okay, computers can defend, but for a human, even for world champion, that would have been a lot of suffering. And who knows? The black king will always be safe here, and white will always have to worry about his king's safety as long as the queens are on the board. But Karjakin went for bishop d5, and now Carlsen played e6, very good practical move. King g3 was possible, but then this looks hugely dangerous after queen b1, queen d2. White has to find a number of only moves to stay in the game here, and does indeed escape with the king, but let's be honest, you don't want to play this in a practical game without the help of computers, having the king on g5, but it does work for white, and black doesn't have anything better than to give a perpetual here with queen h7, queen g8. So good choice by Carlsen, going for e6, giving the pawn back and covering h8. Now queen takes e6, king g3, and this was the last critical moment, I would say. Karjakin still could have obtained an annoying initiative, or well, just keep the position ongoing with a nice prophylactic maneuver. So right now, Carlsen's played king g3, and his next moves are rook h2 and rook h8, if black allows it, to exchange the rooks. So if you spot that, then you will also maybe find out a way how black can prevent this. And he can do so by going king b8 with the idea of rook h2 now, king a7, and rook h8 now doesn't work anymore because the queen doesn't take with check since the king is on a7. Black can now, of course, just take the bishop. So rook h2 already would be a mistake. And, well, the king will just go to a7 now and also be covered from checks. And black can just keep on playing this position. And white doesn't have a way to clearly equalize anytime soon. So this would have been still uncomfortable for white, even though it should be holdable. After queen e7, what Karjakin did, now rook h2 was possible. And now Karjakin played queen f7, maybe the last chance to keep the position a little bit more interesting was queen c7, f4, now just taking this pawn on a5, where I would say from a practical point of view, this still seems quite sketchy for white, but it all works because this queen is very strong, covering also the h8 square, and it all works for white, but it seems like there was more, well, potential for white to go wrong. On the other hand, possibly there's also some potential for black to go wrong. In the game, Karjakin played queen f7, of course threatening the pawn, but white can just go forward. In fact, he has all the important squares covered. Now it takes with the queen, and if the queens come off, white doesn't have to fear anything anymore, of course. Queen e7, now rook h5, good move. Having the idea of rook e5, now rook f8 was played. If rook e8, targeting the bishop, then white has a cute little maneuver to exchange everything. And bishop f4, and the obstacle bishop endgame is a draw. So rook f8 was played, now rook h7. Little tactic here, if black takes on h7, white takes on f8. So Karjakin took on f4, rook takes e7, and rook e4 with a draw offer, because once the rooks come off, the obstacle bishop endgame is a draw, and Carlsen accepted. Let me just show you real quick, in case you're wondering. Hold on, white has this passed g-pawn, but black will just set up an easy fortress and there's no way to get through. White gets the pawn all the way to g7, but that's it. If the king tries to go to h7, black will just play bishop g8 and no way to make any progress. The king will just move between d7 and e8 and that's it. Of course, once the king happens to go to e5, you don't let the king into d6, but you just move your bishop. And that's it. So easy fortress, and Carlsen didn't have to see this anymore. And a draw was agreed at this point in the game. So for the first time in the match, Karjakin had an advantage and he could have put a lot of pressure, but then he didn't find the most precise moves. And Karjakin was able to equalize. Carlsen was able to equalize and get away here. But this phase of the game where Karjakin marched with his king over to the queen side was quite impressive play, and he outplayed Carlsen there and went from a position where everybody said, well, he can only draw or lose here. He went to a position where he actually had winning chances. So that was really impressive. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this analysis. By the way, if you would like to be notified when I publish my analysis or any other videos, you can just subscribe to my channel and you get a notification. Or you can also follow me on Facebook or Twitter or, well, whatever there is. You can find all that in the description. Alright, I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye bye.